Let's talk about the parts of narcissism that make it dangerous, okay? Narcissism isn't just about an overgrown adolescent spouse liking bikini pictures on Instagram, or flirting with a colleague at work, or unfathomable selfishness, or a friend always being competitive with you and not caring about your feelings, or a narcissistic parent once again wailing that you won't be coming home for the holidays and calling you ungrateful or a selfish brat. It can be that, and it often is. But there are some signs of narcissism that when they come together, we need to sit up straighter and recognize that this is beyond just a heartbreaking annoyance, but something more pernicious and potentially harmful. A I think one of the most important papers that's come out in a long time by people called Sophie Kierovic and Brad Bushman, that came out a few years ago, I think 2022, found a clear and consistent association between narcissism and all forms of violence and aggression. To me, it was one of the most important papers, like I said, on narcissism that had ever come out, because it really showed the data of what I at least had always suspected. Any one of us in these relationships knew that it felt dangerous, but they finally got the data. Here's the tricky part. Most of us, many of us, I shouldn't say most, many of us will never experience physical aggression and violence from a narcissistic person. Now, many of us also will, but it's not the norm. It may get close. And you may get a sense that over time, if I don't stay within the lines, this could get worse. We may see this in coercively controlled relationships that have not gotten to the point of physical violence yet. So we're kept in check simply because of that potential fear of violence, and inhibited because of the many ways that a narcissistic person could lash out. It's not just physical. Because most of us are not hit by our boss. Or maybe once upon a time, but we're no longer physically abused by a parent or a sibling. We're just emotionally abused now. We may sometimes underestimate the actual danger of a narcissistic relationship. Narcissism and antagonism, and obviously the close neighbors of personality, such as psychopathy and sociopathy, they're dangerous. Being in a relationship with someone with one of these patterns, these are always going to be harmful relationships. And the harm is typically psychological, but it can show up in other ways too. These patterns are harmful and dangerous for society, because narcissistic leaders run workplaces and governments and social agencies, you name it. And then because of those leaders, the people in those systems get harmed. And the narcissistic leaders don't care about the people that they're supposed to lead. Their leadership positions are for them. They're supply for them. It's for their egos, for their power, which is why once a narcissistic person has run an organization, they typically run it into the ground, with little regard for how it has affected the other people. Listen, there are certain things that happen in the narcissistic relationship. I'm going to say, let's call it what they are. They're not dangerous. Charm, charisma, extroversion, their need for admiration. They're annoying and even entertaining, but harmful, no. But they are gateways to get into these relationships that can get you closer to their harmful behaviors. And perhaps the only reasons, like I said, that these qualities like charm and charisma are dangerous is because they're mixed in with some of the stuff I'm going to talk about. These sort of forward-facing, charismatic, entertaining traits that may even feel fun or good may confuse us from seeing the rest of the narcissistic patterns. And the key with assessing and implementing the dangerous signs and signals is that you do not allow yourself to be tricked into the idea that maybe this relationship is not dangerous because this other good stuff is happening. Once you see these signs I'm going to talk about, this relationship's not safe. And whether it escalates to severe psychological control or constant rage that is taking a toll on you, or it builds up a head of steam to violence, pay attention to these forecasting signs. The sad thing is, there is a world where we could prevent this kind of violence within relationships, but our laws and systems are not set up to let us do this. We usually wait until after people are hurt to do something. And then in narcissistic relationships, we often get confused by some of the big shiny stuff like charm or charisma or seductiveness, or the not so shiny stuff that plays on our pity and vulnerability, such as victimhood, shame, and pseudo-apologies. So let's talk about some of the things, the signs about narcissism that can make it dangerous. First is the thin-skinned quality of narcissism. Whether you make a little joke or give feedback or treat the narcissistic person in any way that implies that they're not special, for example, they have to wait in line, they're not given VIP status, well, that's experienced by them as a narcissistic injury, and that shows a cascade effect. In some cases, it may turn to the victimized, sullen, passive-aggressive direction, and they will punish you with their silence. But it can just as easily turn into a massive grudge that will develop a head of steam, and it will grow over time. And because narcissistic people are also impulsive and have trouble with emotional regulation, especially with emotions such as anger, if the narcissistic person feels let down, they will often attack. And if the narcissistic person feels provoked in any way, even if other people watching it don't think this is a provocation, but if they feel provoked, again, even if they're being told that they are not the exception to the rule, that they have to follow the rules just like other people, and certainly if it is more than that, if you make the mistake of giving them the finger because they cut you off in traffic, or yell at them for taking your seat or taking a parking spot, then it can actually become quite dangerous very quickly. The lack of emotional regulation capacities that narcissistic people have means that things can escalate very quickly in these relationships. And the ego injury quickly turns to shame, which quickly turns to targeted rage at the person that they believe caused the injury, which can then turn to not only impulsive rage in the moment, but also plant the seed of a grudge, a slowly plotted revenge. And they will make you pay for making them look or feel bad. Thus the very expensive divorces or frivolous lawsuits that you may have faced from narcissistic people. And that takes us to another sign of dangerousness, or another way dangerousness shows up, which is vindictiveness. Narcissistic people hold grudges and need revenge to feel in control. They plot and scheme, the smear campaigns, the flying monkeys, the stalking. It's all part of the revenge. If they view you as someone who made them feel shame, who made them look bad, who made them not feel special, who didn't read their minds and magically make everything okay, they will seek out revenge. And this vindictiveness is why narcissistic people, again, love lawsuits and suing people, and why they will for months and even years keep sending you crazy texts and threatening emails. They will share lies about you with colleagues and friends. They will be on what can feel like a single-minded mission to cut you off from supports and turn your life into a hyper-vigilant disaster. People who go through more severe versions of this will say that they no longer feel safe in the world and are always looking over their shoulders because they do not know what the narcissistic person will do. Interestingly, it is just a matter of time before the narcissistic person perceives that someone new has wronged them, and they may then put their focus on the new source of rage. But until then, the vindictiveness can do its harm, not just through the actual vindictive and vengeful actions, but also because of this hypervigilance you now have to maintain in the world, and you're not sure what they may do to hurt you. Remember, the vindictiveness is also a way for the narcissistic person to maintain power and control and dominance. It's sort of a chronic drumbeat that reminds them that they are going to end up on top, because they have to end up there. And that people are scared of them and their power. That sense of sort of power and omnipotence soothes the narcissistic personality. The idea that everyone is scared of them doesn't make them feel bad. It bolsters their sense of power. But, and this is where it gets confusing, they still don't like it when folks treat them as though they're scary. They still maintain the conception of themselves as a nice person, but they kind of want people to be scared of them. Very confusing. Another thing contributing to the danger caused by narcissistic relationships is the narcissistic person's victimhood. They truly, really, and to an almost delusional level, believe that they are the victims, that it is a witch hunt, that people are out to get them. It is the egocentric belief that people, lots and lots of people, are all organized to specifically harm them, as though people have nothing better to do. And when something doesn't go the way they want, it is always about how they are being unfairly targeted and zeroed in on. Victimhood is not just pathetic. It can be the fuel for their vindictiveness. The victimhood is also part and parcel of another dangerous pattern we observe in narcissism, which is a chronic suspiciousness verging on paranoia. That they are being specifically targeted. In some cases, can it be delusional? Yep. And we may see the very dangerous mashup of breaks from reality and delusionality and all the narcissistic entitlement and the victimhood. And you can see how those things multiply. And the paranoia is fueled by the entitlement, the victimhood, and can result in absolutely tragic circumstances. And because the person who is behaving like this can still sometimes present as normal-ish to law enforcement or other authorities who are assessing the situation, it can get written off to just being a family thing or people just needing to cool off rather than something that's a pattern and potentially and regularly harmful. The chronic suspiciousness of narcissism is different than the hypervigilance we see in trauma survivors and narcissistic relationship survivors. Suspiciousness is often an unfounded, exaggerated belief that people are out to not give the narcissistic person what they are entitled to, and that people are almost, not quite, but almost out to really get them, while hypervigilance is a fear that something bad is about to happen, and the physiological and the behavioral and the cognitive changes a person experiences because of these fears and concerns. Arrogance is also tricky when it comes to the danger of narcissistic relationships because it comes down to the swagger and the entitled belief that the narcissistic person will never get caught, and even if they do, nothing will happen to them. And historically, in many cases, this has been true. Either the narcissistic person doesn't get caught, or if they get caught, they know people who can make it all go away. Or they're charming enough to get away with it. The family or the partner or other people may ultimately decide to not say anything or to not pursue charges or to just let it go. And if that happens enough, it can really embolden and bolster this sense that the narcissistic person has that they will get away with it. The problem is that the narcissistic danger can escalate over time as the person faces few consequences and nobody leaves them. Ultimately, it may be old age that is the only reason that the narcissistic or antagonistic person slows down, because it does take some energy to yell and do harm to other people. The greatest challenge of the narcissistic and antagonistic personalities is the lack of self-reflective capacity. Narcissistic people can have solid cognitive empathy. They can understand feelings, they can understand your feelings, but because of the low empathy, they really don't care. And it doesn't translate into them ever engaging in compassionate action. The distorted self-conception that narcissistic people have, that they are very empathic, nice people, or long-suffering, victimized people, that they are so nice and great and that the world just mistreats them, means, again, that they feel chronically misunderstood by everyone, but ironically, they completely do not understand themselves. There is a sort of tiny bit of delusion to the narcissistic person. It's not quite enough to qualify as psychosis, but enough to make it that they're clearly not able to self-reflect on their own behavior or on themselves. And this is why therapy with narcissistic clients can be so difficult, and that they often drop out of therapy when the heavy work starts happening. And the thing that may stop most of us from saying something regrettable or acting or lashing out is not just fear of consequences, but not wanting to hurt someone else, recognizing that this is not who we are, and being in touch with our own values and inhibiting ourselves. That loop isn't there for narcissistic people, which is what makes this personality style dangerous. Put simply, narcissistic people kind of don't get it, but more importantly, they don't get themselves, and they kind of don't care. And because that means being in touch with their vulnerability, well, that's not going to happen. So because of that, the narcissistic way is often to scream or shout or punch first and ask for forgiveness later. That's the model that exists for narcissistic people. They want to be able to throw their tantrum, but still have mommy tell them that she loves them afterwards. That works fine for a 3-year-old. It doesn't work well for someone who is 33 or 43 or 53. And on top of that, not only do the narcissistic folks want to have their tantrums and their rages and all of it, they want everyone to forget that it ever happened. And even if you have all the betrayal blindness in the world, your body doesn't forget. All of these patterns, when you take them together, the thin-skinned nature of narcissism, the lack of emotional regulation, the impulsivity, the tendency to believe that they're always a victim and never taking accountability as to their contribution to a situation, and also believing that they should not have to face consequences, the lack of capacity to self-reflect on themselves and their behavior, the suspiciousness, it's all tied up in a big, bright entitlement bow. Interestingly, there are things that can be more protective when it comes to narcissism and the associated dangerousness that this personality style can raise. One of these is the narcissistic person's obsessiveness about looking good to the world and wanting others to think that they're just great. This is where narcissism sort of veers away from psychopathy. Psychopathic and to some degree sociopathic people do not care about that as much, but narcissistic people do. And think of all of these things, if you can, as levers. The more of this caring about the world, what the world thinks, that is present, that strangely, when it comes to dangerousness at least, can be a little protective. Because the narcissistic person can do the calculation that if I get caught doing this, I will look bad. Or there will be a consequence, which I don't deserve, but it may happen. And I won't look good. That can sometimes be protective, especially in more grandiose narcissistic folks. And for this reason, grandiose narcissism may raise less of this terrifying dangerousness issues, and vulnerable and malignant narcissism, especially when they're mixed together, raise more of the interpersonal dangerousness. And then there is shame. Shame makes all of this messy because it contributes to the danger, and it can also be protective. The potential shame of being caught and paraded to the world as a bad person who did a bad thing is actually quite unsettling for a narcissistic person. But Their entitlement and arrogance mean that they think that they will not be caught. However, the shame of not being perfect, because the narcissistic person knows what looks right in the world, can sometimes be what stops things from escalating. But that requires a narcissistic person who cares about their image. Again, more of what we may see in grandiose or self-righteous narcissism. And it also comes down to the levers of impulsivity. The more impulsive, the more harmful. Of thin-skinnedness, the more sensitive and provocable, the more harmful. Of the suspiciousness that others are out to get them, and the entitlement to special treatment. The more of those things that are present, then the shame piece may not put on the brakes on the dangerousness in the same way. We also forget, because we often just use this term dangerous to refer to someone who is physically escalating, that in a world where we are forever linked to electronic communication, a person can easily do harm in other ways, sending frightening or vaguely threatening emails, but not threatening enough for law enforcement to do anything about it, or ambiguous enough so that the person getting it knows that it's a problem, but other people may sort of minimize it and say, well, maybe we're reading it the wrong way. There could be incessant text messages, calling and hanging up, getting new numbers to call you from, coincidentally showing up outside places, waiting outside, then driving away. It feels like menace. And that can keep us feeling that they are imprisoning us and imprisoned in our heads. And let me tell you, as a person who has endured electronic and real-life stalking a few times, to this day, opening up emails on my phone makes me a little sick, and I finally had to hire folks to do that part of the job for me. All of this takes a toll on us and pulls us out of our lives. Frankly, the way narcissism can contribute to dangerousness, it's a public health issue. And our systems do not account for the simple issue that has been upheld by research, that this particular personality style does not change, and that these patterns all but guarantee that in any narcissistic relationship, things are more likely to escalate over time. Kiervik and Bushman's work and other work by Bushman point to an inevitability. These relationships will hurt us in one way, shape, or form. And when these ingredients I am talking about are present more than the shiny charm, charisma, confidence, extroversion, and the stars line up the right way, you have a real problem. And sadly, the way our legal systems, our workplace systems, policies, and procedures are, means that what other people know about a person and the past behavior of a person is often information we don't have, or the kinds of information we can collect about people is restricted. And that means that the way that hiring policies work, at least in the United States, the way that evidence can be placed in front of judges and mediators and juries, the information that we are able to get about people all means that if we had a full picture of a person, we would be in a far better position to assess what could happen. But alas, in a world where I can read 1,000 readings, in a world where I can read 1,000 ratings on a pasta restaurant, but can't learn a damn thing about a dangerous person's past behavior and have to go through the risky process of figuring it out in real time, that's flummoxing. And all we can do is pay attention to these patterns early and catch ourselves before we rationalize them away and say things like, oh, he didn't mean it, or oh, they just needed to cool off, or oh, they just talk crazy sometimes. Oh, he says things he doesn't mean. Oh, see, he was nice to your dog. Oh, see, some people are talking to her and they're all getting along together. Oh, but lots of other people like them. Oh, they just had a stressful day at work. They just had a string of bad luck. Before long, despite all the signs and signals being there that this is not safe. The rationalizations create a new, distorted, and perhaps more comfortable, though fictional, reality. The signs are always there, but sometimes we need to put down our ideals of what we wish the world looked like and be willing to accept what it and some of the people in it actually are, and then make our choices accordingly. But none of that is easy. Our schemas and histories, well, they throw off our compasses, and self-blame is our fallback. So we have provided links to the various articles I talked about. I do say, though, some of these articles may be behind paywall. They're in the video notes. But other books that take this all on well include, for example, Gavin de Becker's book, The Gift of Fear. That book and the work of others and what they have to say, at least personally I can say, have made me feel less crazy at reading these signs after I had been harmed. And even while people were telling me, oh, maybe you're just being too harsh, maybe you're not being nice, one day you wake up and realize that, I guess I did, I'd rather be called an unfriendly bitch than take those risks ever again. People who study this closely are all telling you the signs are there, the patterns are there, and we need to get out of our